Aita for secretly responding after my wife moved her family in and insulted me. My wife Andrea 29 Fahrenheit and I 32 minutes have been together for 6 years, married for the last 2. Our relationship had always been pretty good, except for one recurring issue. Her family, Andrea has a rather large family. Her parents and 3 siblings have always been very close, living in a house. Her grandfather left them as an inheritance. Although I didn't grow up in a healthy family environment, I understood and appreciated their closeness. However, in recent months, I had begun to feel distant from them. They constantly pressured Andrea and me to have children, something we had made clear we weren't ready for despite our refusals. Every time we visited them or they visited us, the topic came up again and again. Andrea insisted they understood. Their insistence was frustrating to me more than that. It made me feel like they didn't respect our decisions. Of course, I wanted to talk to them about it. Andrea preferred to avoid conflict and said it was better to leave things as they were. Everything came to a head 2 weeks ago when a fire destroyed their family home. Although the reconstruction was covered by insurance, they would need a place to stay for several months. The insurance would only provide temporary lodging for 2 weeks, and after that, they would have to pay themselves. That's when Andrea, without consulting me, invited them to stay at our house, not just her parents, but also her 3 siblings, all adults in their 20s with steady jobs and incomes. I understand that in today's economy, it can be difficult for many to find their own place, but what I didn't understand was why her siblings couldn't seek temporary housing on their own. When I found out about Andrea's decision, I was stunned. Having her parents living with us would be a challenge but manageable. However, supporting her entire family, 7 adults in total, completely unfeasible, not just because of space, but also finances. I expressed my concern to Andrea, but she refused to reconsider. She argued that it was her family and she couldn't just leave them on the street. Furthermore, she had already promised them that they wouldn't have to pay anything while staying with us. This seemed completely irresponsible to me. Our finances could barely support ourselves and her parents, let alone 3 other adults who could and should find other solutions. The argument escalated quickly. Andrea called me selfish for not wanting to help them during such a difficult time, but I felt I was being reasonable. It wasn't about not wanting to help, but about not being able to do so without ruining our own finances. I try to stay calm, but when I tried to explain that her siblings were perfectly capable of finding their own accommodations, Andrea simply ignored me. Finally, she lost her temper and threw something at me that left me devastated. She called me a worthless orphan. Those words hit me harder than I could have imagined. I lost my parents in a car accident when I was 9. Since then, I was raised by relatives who never treated me as a priority until a great uncle adopted me at 13. Although he gave me a home, there was never a true emotional connection. I lost my uncle a couple of years ago, and since then I haven't had a father figure place I can truly call home. Andrea knew how painful it was for me to talk about my past, and using it against me was a low blow. I locked myself in my office and didn't say another word that night. I hoped she would at least apologize or try to talk to me the next day, but she went to work as if nothing had happened. That's when I decided I had to make a drastic decision that morning. While Andrea was at work, I decided to stay home and put into motion a plan I had been considering since our argument. I called the landlord and informed him that I wanted to terminate the lease as soon as possible. He agreed to start the process, although he reminded me that Andrea would also have to agree since we were both leaseholders. However, since I was the one who had handled most of the payments and communication, I was confident I could do it without immediate problems. While talking to the landlord, started packing my things. I only took the essentials, clothes, important documents, and a few personal items I couldn't leave behind. I wasn't sure how long I would be gone or if I would ever return that afternoon. I went to a close friend's house who offered to let me stay while I sorted things out. The next few days were strange. Andrea didn't call or text me, only confirm my worst fears. What she had said during our fight wasn't just an outburst but something she truly felt. This hurt me more than I expected. I had invested so much in our relationship, believing we had a strong connection, but now I felt like a stranger in her life. 5 days passed before Andrea finally called me, but not to apologize. She contacted me because the landlord had informed her that I had initiated the process to terminate the lease. When I answered her call, her tone was full of anger. She accused me of being childish and taking things too far. According to her, my decision to leave the house had put the whole family in a difficult situation. "Why didn't you tell me anything? What am I supposed to do now? Can't pay the rent alone?" She yelled at me over the phone. I responded calmly but firmly. "Andrea, I couldn't continue living in a house where my opinions and feelings are respected. I canceled the lease because there was no point in maintaining a situation where I was the last to be consulted, let alone valued." Then something unexpected happened. Andrea started to cry. Her voice changed tone, and between sobs, she confessed that she had talked to her family after our fight. She had told them that only her parents could stay, and that her siblings would have to find their own accommodations. Her family, far from being grateful, reacted badly. Her siblings were furious about having to find another place. Her parents couldn't believe Andrea would break her word. They fought with me. Diego, my own family treated me like I had betrayed them, but I did it because I understood what you said was right. I couldn't expect us to carry all of this alone. But by the time I understood, you were already gone. Her confession left me speechless. On one hand, felt a small satisfaction that at least in part she had understood my position. But on the other hand, I was still hurt by what had happened. I had reached a point where I didn't know if our relationship could recover. Told her I needed time to think. Andrea tearfully agreed. She didn't insist or pressure me, which was a change from her attitude in our last argument. A couple of hours after that call, I received messages from her parents. It was the first time they had contacted me since all of this began, to my surprise. It wasn't to criticize me. They apologized. They told me they had reflected on what happened and understood that they had crossed boundaries by expecting me to take them all in without any prior conversation or agreement. We know we made mistakes. The message said, Andrea explained your point of view. We want you to know that we didn't want to put you in this position. We're sorry for making you feel pressured. We hope you will consider talking to Andrea to work things out. That night I felt more confused than ever. My anger towards Andrea hadn't dissipated, but her family's words made me think. I decided not to respond immediately, neither to Andrea nor her parents. I needed more time to process everything. However, deep down, something had changed. Andrea had confronted her family, something I never thought she would do. They had taken a step back by apologizing to me. It was a small indication that maybe things could improve. The next day, I decided to talk to a friend I trust completely. He advised me that even if I was considering divorce, I owed Andrea a serious conversation before making any decisions. If you really believe she's the person you want to be with, you need to hear her out. If it doesn't work, at least you'll know you did everything you could. After reflecting, I sent a message to Andrea. I told her we could talk in person, but she needed to be honest with me about what she expected from our relationship in the future. She responded immediately, saying she was willing to talk whenever I was ready. That same afternoon, I went to our house to talk to Andrea. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me feared it would be a conversation full of recriminations, but another part hoped we could truly understand each other. When I arrived, Andrea greeted me with an unexpected hug. She started crying immediately, and I knew this wasn't going to be easy for either of us. We sat on the couch and started talking. Andrea apologized again. This time in more detail. She admitted that she had made a serious mistake by inviting her whole family without consulting me, and even worse, by saying such hurtful things during our fight. She explained that she had felt trapped between her loyalty to them and her relationship with me. When the fire started and my family asked for help, felt like I had to say yes without thinking. I've always been the one who takes care of them, Diego. And at the time I didn't see how selfish I was being by not considering you. When you left, I understood that my decision was affecting not only our relationship but also my own ability to manage boundaries with them. I thanked her for being honest, but I was also clear about my feelings. I told her how much it had hurt me that she used my past against me, something she knew was a deep wound. She looked down, clearly remorseful. I know, Diego, and there's no excuse for what I said. I was furious, but that doesn't justify using something so personal to hurt you. I felt horrible ever since. If I could go back in time, I would never have said it was a difficult moment for both of us. But somehow I felt relieved to hear her sincerity after talking about our emotions. We moved on to discussing what to do about her family and how to prevent something like this from happening again. Andrea told me she had talked to her siblings after our discussion. She explained that they couldn't stay with us and that they needed to find their own accommodations. Their reaction had been as expected, negative. Her siblings were upset, arguing that as family she had an obligation to help them. They even accused her of prioritizing me over them. That was one of the hardest moments for me, Andrea admitted. I've always done everything I could for them, but this time I realized it wasn't right to continue letting myself be manipulated by their demands. It hurt, but I told them they couldn't stay here. When I asked her what happened with her parents, she said they had been more understanding, although they were still disappointed that they couldn't all stay together as a family. However, they eventually found a temporary arrangement with help from insurance and close friends. I think it also helped them that you left, Diego. Andrea confessed that made them reflect on how much our fight had affected them and how much we were asking of you in our relationship. We decided that the best thing to do would be to set clear boundaries with her family in the future. We both agreed that she could remain close to them, but without it affecting our relationship or our decisions as a couple. Andrea even suggested going to couples therapy to learn to communicate better and handle situations like these without going to extremes. Before I could respond, Andrea said something that took me by surprise. Diego, there's something else I want to tell you. I think I'm pregnant. Time seemed to stop for months. We had discussed not being ready to have children, but now it seemed things had changed. Andrea explained that she had been feeling different for days, and that although she hadn't confirmed it, she was almost certain it was true. I wasn't planning on telling you yet, but I feel like after everything we've been through, you need to know. I don't know if this changes anything for you, but I want you to know before we make decisions about our future. I was speechless. On one hand, the idea of being a father at that moment overwhelmed me. But on the other, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe this challenge could be an opportunity to start over, to build something stronger together. I told her I needed time to process this new information, that I wasn't closing any doors. Andrea nodded, giving me the space I needed after that conversation. Took a couple of days to reflect, to talk to friends who encouraged me to consider couples therapy as an option to save our marriage. I felt that Andrea was truly willing to change, and her sincerity gave me a reason to give her another chance. Finally, I sent her a message and told her I was willing to try to work things out. As long as we both worked on our flaws and committed to making real changes, Andrea accepted without hesitation. We decided to look for a couples therapist immediately, something we had never considered before, but now seemed essential. We also agreed to stick together as a team, facing whatever came next, including the possibility of a baby. I returned to the house after several days of absence. Although I was still processing everything, I felt this step was necessary if we wanted to rebuild our relationship. Andrea greeted me with a mix of relief and nervousness. Although we had talked and agreed to try, the weight of what had happened still hung in the air. Despite that, I decided it was best to focus on moving forward. Our first big task was finding a couples therapist. We both knew we would need professional help to overcome what had happened. We found a therapist recommended by a friend. After the first session, I knew we had made the right decision. From the beginning, she challenged us to confront our communication problems and to be honest about our emotions, even when that meant having uncomfortable conversations. One of the most difficult points we discussed in therapy was how Andrea handled the dynamics with her family. She admitted that for years she had assumed the role of mediator and problem solver for them. This made her feel important and needed. But it had also created a toxic relationship where her family's demands always took priority, even at the expense of our marriage. I felt like if I wasn't there for them, I would disappoint them, Andrea explained during a session. But now I understand that I was also disappointing myself. Andrea went alone to visit them to prevent my presence from intensifying the tensions. She spent almost 2 hours with them. When she returned home, she was visibly exhausted. It was as difficult as I expected, she told me sitting down on the couch. My siblings were furious. They said I was changing and that I was no longer the same sister who always supported them. They even accused me of being influenced by you. My parents tried to mediate, but in the end they sided with them too. Andrea told me that she had tried to explain how our relationship had been affected by her family's constant demands. They didn't want to hear it when she asked them to respect her boundaries and understand that our relationship should be a priority. Conversation turned sour. Her siblings declared that if she wanted to distance herself from them, they would too. They told me that if that's what I want, they will maintain the boundaries for real without talking to me anymore. Andrea explained with a mix of sadness and resignation. I don't know if they were serious or if they just wanted to manipulate me, but I told them I will do what I need to protect our relationship, even if it means losing contact with them for a while. Although she was hurt, Andrea also felt proud of having stood her ground. For the first time, she had prioritized our relationship over her need to meet her family's expectations. I also felt relieved to see that she was willing to work on the problems that had led us to this point. A week later, Andrea confirmed what we suspected. She was pregnant. Although we had already discussed it, the certainty made everything feel more real. Instead of feeling fear or uncertainty, we were both excited. Perhaps the therapy sessions had helped us strengthen our relationship, or perhaps the prospect of becoming parents gave us something positive to focus on. We decided to wait before announcing it to our families. We knew that the pregnancy could create new tensions with her family. We wanted to make sure we were fully prepared before facing that conversation. Shortly after Andrea confirmed her pregnancy, her parents called her again. First, her parents, they called to apologize for how they had handled the situation. Although they were still upset, they acknowledged that their reaction had been exaggerated, and that they wanted to make amends. I think it hurt them more than they wanted to admit that I stood my ground, Andrea told me after talking to them. But they also realized that if we stayed estranged, could lose something bigger. We didn't mention the pregnancy in that conversation, and Andrea made it clear that although she was willing to work on her relationship with them, she was not going to tolerate disrespect towards our life as a couple. Her siblings, on the other hand, still hadn't tried to contact her. We knew it might take time and decided not to force reconciliation. Andrea felt that she had done the right thing by setting boundaries, and I fully supported her decision as the tensions with her family slowly subsided. Andrea and I began to adapt to our new reality. Pregnancy, although unexpected, brought us together in ways we hadn't imagined. We were now focused on building a future together, one where we both felt like we were a team. We continued attending couples therapy, which helped us deal with small conflicts before they became major problems. We also learned to communicate better and to express our needs without fear of judgment or rejection. Andrea, for her part, was working on separating her identity from her family's expectations. Although the process was difficult, each small step made her feel stronger and more confident in herself. Months passed, and Andrea and I continued to strengthen our relationship as we prepared for the baby's arrival. Couples therapy remained a fundamental part of our progress. It had taught us to be more open and to face difficulties as a team rather than against each other. Although there were still wounds to heal, we felt that we had made enormous progress since our initial fight. Andrea was much more aware of the importance of setting boundaries with her family. I learned to express my feelings in a more constructive way, although not everything was perfect. The fact that we were working together had restored our confidence in our marriage. Around the 6th month of pregnancy, Andrea decided to tell her family the news. We had kept the pregnancy a secret all this time because we wanted to be emotionally prepared for any reaction. Finally, Andrea felt it was the right time to talk to them. Her parents received the news with joy, although they were a little surprised at first that we had waited so long to tell them. Her mother cried with happiness, and her father, although more reserved, expressed his excitement by saying he was looking forward to meeting his grandson or granddaughter. However, her siblings reacted differently. Although they weren't openly hostile, it was evident that they still harbored resentment over the way Andrea had handled the family tensions. One of them even commented sarcastically, "Well, at least now we know why you put us aside." Andrea didn't let herself be intimidated for the first time. She responded firmly saying, "I didn't put you aside. I simply learned to set boundaries, and if you can't respect that, it will be difficult for us to have a healthy relationship, especially now that I'm starting my own family." That response silenced any further negative comments. Although the relationship with her siblings was still tense, Andrea felt that she was finally taking control of her life as the pregnancy progressed. Andrea and I began to reflect on how we wanted to raise our child. This conversation led us to talk about the values we wanted to transmit and the lessons we had learned from our own families. It was an emotional moment for me, as I couldn't help but think about my parents and how I would have liked them to be present to see this new stage of my life. Andrea, for her part, acknowledged that her relationship with her family had taught her how important it was to respect boundaries and prioritize the needs of our small family above anything else. We agreed that although we wanted our child to have a close relationship with their grandparents and uncles and aunts, we wouldn't allow toxic dynamics to infiltrate our parenting. Finally, the day arrived when Andrea gave birth. It was a moment full of intense emotions. Everything we had gone through in the last year seemed to fade away as we held our baby for the first time. It was a girl, and we decided to name her Sophia. The first few days at home were challenging, beautiful. We were both exhausted. There was a renewed joy in our relationship. Although there were still aspects to resolve with her family, we now had something bigger that united us. A week after the birth, Andrea's parents came to visit us. They were thrilled to meet Sophia. Although there was some awkwardness at first, the happiness for the baby seemed to soften the tensions. Her siblings, however, didn't show up, something Andrea had expected that didn't hurt her as much as she feared. If they want to be part of Sophia's life, they'll have to do it on our terms. She told me that night, "I'm not going to allow them to cross boundaries like before." I felt proud of her. She had come a long way from the time when she prioritized her family's expectations over our relationship. Now she was more focused on what really mattered: our family. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the next story.